Welcome to the Journey Podcast. I am your host, Josh Valentine, and today I have the honor and privilege of bringing to you guys one of the most dynamic, inspirational, incredible human beings I've ever had the privilege of meeting. And he is not only just a beautiful soul, an amazing man, amazing father, husband, but also he has a very fascinating background. He has lived a life as a Marine, as a paramedic, as an entrepreneur, as a psychologist. He is the founder of the Tampa Counseling and Wellness Center. He has so many different hats that I can mention here. And I'm just excited to go deep into his story. I know you guys are going to be truly blessed by it. So, Dr. Carlos,
Josh,
thank you so much, brother, for having me here in your podcast setup. And I have to start off this episode by first and foremost just speaking a little bit about your character. So I had a very interesting situation happen. We shot an episode here probably about 2 months ago.
Right.
And it was
a beautiful episode, by the way.
Probably the most dynamic interview I've ever had. And for whatever reason, the episode just vanishes. It vanishes. And I was freaked out because it was already a lot to just set this all up. And we put this all together and we delivered such an incredible interview. And I'm there and we had Trey just looking around for it and we just could not find it.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? I was trusting in divine intervention. And I said, if there's anyone that would be understanding, it would be you. And it took me about a week to finally muster out the courage to reach out. And you just came from a place of deep compassion and understanding. And I thank you for giving us another round.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when you said that, the first thing I did was chuckle because I had the same, I was like, okay, perfect. That means it wasn't supposed to be out yet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So look, it landed us with this beautiful opportunity to sit down and maybe go a little bit deeper into some of the things we talked about. So
absolutely. Absolutely. And there was a great takeaway in that because I think that sometimes we have these things happen to us in life and we fail to realize at times that there may be a blessing in there. There may be some good that you can extract from it. There may be a learning lesson. And in this case, I said, you know what? Let's deliver the very best interview, the longest interview that we've done to date. And what better person to do it with than Dr. Carlos? So
it's an absolute honor to be here with you, brother. I love the work that you're doing out there, your message, your energy. So it's, I'm truly humbled to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's interesting. We actually met on a TV station that where we're expert contributors for an NBC network out here. And I remember just hearing your content for the very first time and just was blown away. And there's a reason why they bring you back all the time. So
appreciate it. I always wonder why they bring you back. So thank you.
So I want to go into a little bit about your journey. I have a good understanding now after so many hours of conversation at this point, but I want to go into your journey, just your upbringing. You've lived so many lives in one, and your family's originally from Cuba.
From Cuba, yeah.
And I would love to take it back. So just your family, your upbringing, what that looked like for you, and just life in Florida, that Florida upbringing.
Yeah. So, my family essentially came to the United States escaping communism and Fidel Castro in Cuba. And so, I had a lot of stories about essentially what was happening with the government there at the time. There were, there was this moment where Fidel Castro sort of opened his borders and started allowing people out. And so in the time when I came, which was 1990, it was considered the Mariel boat lift. There was something like 125,000 Cubans that migrated from Cuba to Florida within a 6-month period. There was this exodus of Cubans because they were escaping sort of communism. And so my parents' story was they had an opportunity to leave. And within a couple of days, they had to make the decision to take me and my brother and essentially not even pack up anything. We had to come with nothing because the government seized whatever you had at the time. So we just came, with the clothes we were wearing and landed in Key West, Florida.
Wow.
Fortunately, we had an aunt that was living here. And so, she took us under her roof for a little bit of, for a couple of months until my parents were able to, find some work. And start a life all over again.
Got it.
Yeah.
So, did they have some law in place where they allowed Cubans to come in legally and just get them sorted out with their paperwork? Is that how it was?
Yeah. So what happened around that time was that there were several Cubans that raided the U.S. embassy in Cuba. And they essentially drove a vehicle, or I think it was a bus, through the gates of the U.S. embassy and said, "We're not leaving here until you get us out of this situation." And then over the course of like the next several days, Cubans started to flood the U.S. embassy. And that's when I think it was Carter at the time said, "Okay, we need to do something about this, right, in order to sort of level off the tension that is happening politically." And I think there were some talks with Castro, and Castro sort of said, "Okay, like if you guys want to leave my country, I'm going to let you leave."
Mm,
Um, what he didn't realize was how many people wanted to leave. So when he started seeing the exodus of people wanting to leave, he got a little spiteful. And what he started to do is he emptied out all of his prisons, all of his mental health asylums.
yeah.
And he was like, if you, for every family member you take, you have to take, some of these people on the boat. So when there was this big exodus of Cubans landing in Miami, that's why a lot of us were seen as, criminals or
Wow.
just, people that were up to no good. And so it was quite an interesting story.
I never heard that
Yeah.
part of the
Yeah.
story
Yeah.
in that way.
Yeah.
So,
So my aunt sent a boat to pick us up, but she also had to take, people that we didn't even know, and just, so it was really interesting.
wow, that's so you were a young baby,
I was 2. Yeah.
2 years old.
Yeah.
So
So these are
no
these are
memory.
stories that
Yeah, no
I
memory. Um,
heard over.
yeah. So, did your parents tell you about the experience where you guys were on a boat, or
Yeah. We came here on a boat, and one of the first boats that they sent over to get us actually had some issues and was sinking, and it was a whole ordeal. But eventually we sort of made it to U.S. soil. I learned about these stories not only through my parents and family, but in reading some of the history,
Yeah.
reading a lot of books. I was always deeply passionate about understanding like my roots, like
Mm.
where did I came from? What was my story?
Yeah.
Right. And that's
Yeah.
kind of, as we go through today, it's been the essence of my life, really
Yeah.
wanting to understand, where I come from.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
incredible. We didn't catch that on the
Yeah,
last
no, we
one.
did
I'm
it.
happy
We did
that
it. Yeah.
you brought that
Yeah.
up. How do you feel today about just even the dynamic that Cuba has with the United States, or just your sentiments towards their way of life and their political systems?
Sure. Yeah, it's a heartbreaking one, Josh, to be honest. That here is this nation state only 90 miles away from the United States, one of the most powerful governments,
Yeah.
so called, and that here's like tirade and communism in his essence, only 90 miles away from our country. And if you look at the history of Cuba and the United States, there's multiple instances of things that happened throughout history that
Cuban Missile Crisis.
Cuban Missile Crisis, things like that. But just one change in a political decision, one thing done differently, and maybe Cuba would have been annexed, sort of like Puerto Rico,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But it's heartbreaking because one of the things that's happening now is a lot of folks travel to Cuba as tourists, and it's the old cars and what a beautiful city, and all of this stuff, but they don't see what's going on behind the scenes. I have still family that's over there that has to wait in line to get
Yeah.
some rice, and that's
Mm.
only maybe once a month. And they spend 20 hours out of the day with no electricity or no
Yeah.
power, and they're essentially starving and
Yeah.
can't find food. And so how does that happen in such an industrialized modern day world, right? And so
Absolutely.
it's heartbreaking. It's
Yeah, I remember going to Cuba for the very first time, and I'm actually supposed to be doing a speaking event there
heartbreaking. Yeah.
this
Yeah.
year. So, but I remember going there for the very first time, and what really rubbed me off the wrong way was seeing a man with his family, and to know that that man is living on less than $100 a month.
Yeah.
And to see someone with so much potential, because Cubans are very talented
Yeah.
people, very resourceful and creative people,
Very.
but to see a political system work against a man like that with a family and diminish his
Mhm.
power or his spirit,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
To me, that was the part that affected me,
Totally.
in that way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
So I'm with you, brother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's a beautiful piece to it too, right? As a result of, some of that political, like, distress. When you travel to Miami, you see the essence of Cuba,
Yeah.
right? Like the
Very
Cuban
true.
people, the foods, the music, right? Like
Absolutely.
it's just built a beautiful tapestry that
Mhm.
is not just Miami, but
Yeah.
has influenced, even the state of Florida in
Most
different ways.
definitely.
Here in
Yeah.
Tampa, right?
Yeah.
The beautiful cigars and the culture is
Mhm.
is really now here in the United
Yeah.
States. So there is a beautiful piece to that
For
as well.
sure. Yeah. I find that a lot of Cubans, also just very hard-working
Yeah,
people, very ambitious
yeah,
people.
yeah, yeah.
Where
We're
do you
resilient.
Yeah,
Resi-
resilient, right? And, very patriotic for the US as
Yeah,
well. Like,
absolutely.
they love the United
Absolutely.
States. They
Yeah.
love, our democracy and, our political system,
Yeah.
and, they
Yeah.
stand behind it. And
Absolutely.
where does this grit, this hustle, this resilience
Yeah.
for first generation or second generation Cubans, do you feel like it's something that's dying down, or do you feel like a lot of these values are being passed on? And is it something where in the family dynamic, like,
Yeah.
hey, this is where we come from? Do you see a lot of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. I think there's probably people that would say that some of the folks coming from Cuba now, it's a lot easier for them
Mm,
because there are already systems
of
and
course.
structures and
Programs.
infrastructures in
Mhm.
place to support and
Yeah.
help them. But I think, earlier generations came with that mindset of grit and hard work because, I mean, even though we came in in the 80s, Castro was starting to take power in the 60s. I mean, that's how long of an influence he has had on that country. And so even back then, and even before Castro, some of the presidents that were there before, like Cuba has always been a country of struggle, political struggle,
Mm,
struggle for food, struggle for freedom. So I think that's where it's come from. It's just woven into our bones and our
mm,
DNA,
yeah.
that to be resourceful, to
Yeah.
fight,
Mm,
right? And so I think, um, y- you know, eh, when I think about my parents, for example, that's not a message that they ever sort of outwardly spoke to me,
mm,
but I saw it, right? I
mm,
saw it in, when we came to this country, how they, just found any work that they could and just worked so hard and diligently to put food on the table and to, provide my brother and I with a school to go to and,
yeah.
resources to, that we didn't, have before. So, I think it does get passed down from generation to generation in that way.
For
And
sure.
what you see modeled for you.
Yeah, for sure. I know that you've had some challenges throughout childhood, right? Because I remember hearing your story for the very first time and thinking, oh, you've got your mom, you've
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
your dad, and first generation. I guess. Well, I mean, you were born in Cuba, but you're
Sure.
technically the first
Yeah.
generation
Yeah.
to live this
Mhm.
Americanized life. But there were some challenges there as well. There were some
Yeah.
traumas there as
Yeah.
well, and especially as you've referenced your father at times and everything like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I know recently he has transitioned, and God bless his soul.
Yeah. Thank you,
And
Josh.
we're truly grateful for him and his sacrifice, right, to come out
Yeah.
here and make
Yeah.
something of himself. But
Yeah.
one of the things that I like to do, outside of paying homage to a lot of parents,
Mhm.
right? Because it's
Mhm.
not easy being a parent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being a dad, it
Yeah.
has its
Yeah.
challenges, and
Absolutely.
but I like to just offer teaching points and
Sure.
lessons on why certain parents end up the way
Yeah.
that they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's interesting. We kind of started off with Cuba
Yeah.
because that obviously had an effect on his psychology, on his survival,
Yeah.
on just the way he went about his parenting style.
Absolutely.
And what was your experience when it
Yeah.
came to that?
Yeah, Josh, I think I want to sort of preface this conversation with a few points first, right? Oftentimes, in my work as a psychologist, when I'm inviting people to understand their history, understand their story, there's this kind of immediate resistance to wanting to blame parents or look at
Exactly.
parents in a certain
System.
light, right? Um, and I get where that comes from. It's from our deep love and compassion for the people that raised us, that
Of
helped
course.
us sort of survive. But that doesn't dismiss that there are certain things that happened in our past that also contributed to how we came to perceive and live in the world. And so, I want to just sort of say that I absolutely adore my parents. They're beautiful beings. And also there were certain things about their lives that created a bit of chaos for me in the house that I was growing in as a child. So, thank you for mentioning my father. He recently passed. Um, I was just home at last week in Miami, and under the sort of under the guise of grieving the loss of my father. And it was really interesting to just navigate that space and just be with it, because the grieving was also the most healing moment. All right. I sort of, one of the things we'll talk about in a little bit is just this ability to stay more present, the importance of mindfulness and meditation. And so even though a part of my heart was breaking, I was very open to what was unfolding during that week. And it was this experience of having family members, friends. There's a good friend of my dad's that they grew up together. They've known each other since they were 5 or 6. And he came over to the house and was just sharing stories of my dad's childhood, all of the things that they went through. And it was just this beautiful, beautiful opportunity to let love into your heart in the midst of grief, right? Like how do you have your heart open for both of those things at the same time? But yeah, essentially, my mother grew up in a home with a very sort of, I guess the word to use would be neurotic mother, very kind of OCD like, very just, meticulous in the way that she was about a lot of things, which caused a lot of anxiety for my mother. But my mom also grew up with a father that left the family when she was 8 years old. So she didn't grow up with a male figure in her life of strength. My dad grew up in a home with a very stern, authoritative father, my grandfather. He was a no nonsense type of guy in Cuba, a businessman, and he was, he ruled with an iron fist. My dad lost his twin brother, his best friend, when he was 16 years old. And there's some uncertainty as to whether it was suicide or he was shot. But what I do know is that my grandfather went to investigate and then came home that day and said to the family, it's just to never be spoken about ever again. All right. I never heard my father in all of the years I've known him to speak about his brother. Right. So my dad, I think, probably had a lot of pain in his heart and probably didn't have models or people to teach him how to navigate that. So now they moved to the United States. My mother and father, I think, had a rocky marriage even from the get-go. I mean, just think about it. When we don't do the work that we need to do to heal them ourselves, we tend to take that stuff with us into the future. Now they're forced to be in a new country with nothing, learning a new language, trying to survive after they were, living back home with everything surrounded by family and love. And I think that extra pressure put a lot on the marriage that they weren't able to sort of understand how to tolerate or navigate.
Yeah.
And so I think when I was coming up 3, 4, 5 years old, what that led to was growing up in this home of a lot of bitterness, a lot of anger, a lot of anxiety, a lot of chaos, a lot of fighting, a lot of just really sort of violent interactions, right? My father was, he believed in corporal punishment. I mean, many spankings that I can remember, some that I don't want to remember.
Right.
That was seen as normal back in the day, right? It wasn't until I went to therapy and started to realize the actual impact of that on a child's sort of psychology that I started to understand, some of the ways that I view myself, some of the narratives that I held about myself for many, many years. So yeah, that, even though I can honor my parents' own trauma, it led to trauma in my own life that was very, very difficult to overcome for many years.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. What would you say, in terms of your parents, right? Because there's always this dichotomy of maybe the negative aspects, the shadows of our parents that we've experienced. And as you know, in psychology, you oftentimes hear, especially as it pertains to Jungian psychology, that the shadow oftentimes gets projected on the closest people to you, right? And
Yeah.
typically that's in the household, that's your
Yeah.
significant other, that's your
Yeah.
children.
Yeah.
But on the contrary, you also have that dynamic where you get a lot of their great qualities as well. And there are certain things that actually benefit you later on in
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
So oftentimes, for example, I didn't grow up with my biological father, but I had my stepfather, and
Yeah.
he, of course, had the negative side of
Right.
his character, but also there were things that I was able to benefit from, like the discipline, right?
Sure.
The
Sure.
going to work, never
Yeah.
complaining about work,
Yeah.
and being a hard worker
Mhm.
and showing up for your kids, those aspects.
Yeah.
What would you say for your parents? What were the greatest things that you were able to take away, even,
Yeah.
in the midst of going through the chaotic aspect of it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and probably one that a lot of people who have maybe had a challenging relationship with their parents in the past, they face, right?
Mhm.
Because oftentimes I think when those dark sides, when there's resentment, when there's anger, right, when there's maybe even some deep shame about the kinds of families that we grew up in or who our parents were, it's really it can be really challenging to step into that place of acceptance and love.
Mhm.
And that's part of my story. For many years, I was deeply angry that, right, because I didn't want to understand their story,
Yeah.
right? The child in me was like, fuck you,
Yeah.
right? Figure it out,
Ab-
right? Like why couldn't you have separated? Why could it, right? Like the inner child in me was feeling hurt and didn't want to even see compassion,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it was through doing that inner work on myself of letting go of the resentment and the anger that I started to then be able to see the light,
Yeah.
right? Who were these people beyond the limiting way that I was seeing them,
Yeah.
right? And so I think for my father, um, every fucking room he stepped into, he lit up,
Mm.
right? He was just this beautiful, like loving, compassionate man. And he was funny. I mean, he had stories to tell and jokes to tell. Um, and again, it's been beautiful just being around folks sort of sharing, how they experienced my father in the last couple of weeks since he's departed, right? And since he's transitioned.
Yeah.
And I even remember as a child, I would look around and be like, man, how is it that so many people love this guy? It was like, well, okay, maybe they don't, right? Like they don't
Yeah.
see the
Yeah.
version I get to
They're not
see
getting the
sometimes.
shadow.
Right, right. But that was his core. He was just good to the last fiber. He
Wow.
always wanted to go out of his way to do something for you. He was a beautiful storyteller. Yes, he was stern, and I know that comes from just kind of the way that he was raised.
Yeah.
And there are sort of moments where, I've checked in with family members and I'll ask them about, how was I when I was little?
Mhm.
Because in my mind, I was this little
Yeah.
saint.
Same, right?
That wasn't so much
We all,
the case.
we all
And,
thought.
they'll make a face and be like, oh, you when
Yeah.
you were
Yeah.
little. And I'm almost like, yeah, I can see why my father maybe needed to be the way that he was with me. So maybe that was a blessing in disguise, right?
Yeah.
And I do now see it, Josh, as like it was all perfect. It all unfolded exactly the way it needed
That's
to.
right.
If I didn't have the kind of father that I had, I couldn't be the kind of father that I am today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So true.
And I think for my mother, I still have some work to do there. I say to people, she is my most beautiful teacher and patient.
Yeah.
But I've never experienced someone to be so sacrificing
Mm.
in her life, to give up so much of herself, her needs, for the sake of her children. And that is something I will always carry in my heart, right? And I know that there's still some love and compassion that I can find there for her because she can be a little bit challenging at times, as I'm sure other people's mothers are, right? I would say, to answer your question, is those two things: my dad's loving nature and ability to just connect with people and light people
That's
up,
beautiful.
and my mom's ability to just have this deep inner grit when it comes to her
Yeah.
her emotional.
That's
Presence.
beautiful. I'm so happy that we're starting here
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I know that for a lot of people, some of their greatest challenges in life stem from their relationship with their
Yeah.
parents,
Yeah.
wounds that ultimately weren't healed over time.
Totally.
And I know for me, even just going through abandonment, neglect,
Yeah.
and some of these things you don't even realize affected you
Right.
until you get triggered later on in
Right.
life.
Right.
And like
Right.
my father not being present in my life, even though I had a stepfather, just the abandonment, the
Yeah.
constant need for achieving
Yeah.
success, never
Yeah.
feeling like I'm enough,
Yeah.
right? And then to hit that wall later on in life. And I know you know a lot about that.
Yeah.
But I would love for you from a psychology
Sure.
standpoint, for
Sure.
those who are still holding on to
Yeah.
resentment,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
bitterness, to unforgiveness,
Yeah.
what would you recommend for someone
Yeah.
who is still being affected
Sure.
by their relationship
Yeah.
with their parents?
Yeah. That's a beautiful topic to step into, Josh. For multiple reasons. To answer your question, I would sort of just say like honor where you are.
Mm,
Like if you are in a space right now where there's anger, bring some light to that. Get curious about that. Is that a thing you might want to release in your life? How would it benefit you to? How is it not benefiting you to hold on to that anger? Where is that showing up in your life? Because it's showing up right? It's showing up in your relationships. But really just honor where you are, because I think we all have our own journey and our own path with healing,
for sure.
right? With emotional and psychological healing.
Mm,
The other piece that you speak to there, part of the reason I became a psychologist was because of the years that I spent in my own therapy
mm,
and seeing the ways in which doing that inner work, right, whether it's through therapy or whatever other modality of looking at our story and understanding why we show up in the world today the way that we do based on that story. So a big part of my approach as a psychologist is to invite people to get really curious about the environments that they grew up in. I
mm,
think that, we have this idea of mental health that, we should only access it when we're struggling or going through something difficult. I say that we should do it just in an intentional and purposeful way.
sure.
Everyone should do it, because the better you understand yourself, the better you can self master, the better you can navigate the world.
Of course.
The easier things become to handle in your life emotionally and psychologically,
Mm,
right? And so I'll share sort of a little story that I share often with folks. Because in addition to often thinking in mental health that we have to be experiencing a problem before we get help, we also often think, well, oh, there's no trauma in my past. There's nothing there of
mm,
significance. Well, usually that comes from people sort of minimizing their experience. Or I often hear people say, like, I know people that have had it much worse.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
This isn't a point of comparison,
Oh,
right? It's
absolutely.
not,
Absolutely.
it's about honoring like your
That's
story,
right.
right? And so instead of looking at as traumas that may or may not have happened to you, think about them as critical events.
Mm,
There are instances that transpired at some point throughout our childhood that might have, in some way, indoctrinated us or conditioned us to feel and think a certain way about ourselves,
mm,
about the world, and about other people.
yeah.
So the story I use is, here's this child going out to eat with his parents, and they go out to eat every Friday. And on this particular Friday, the parents say, we're going to allow you to choose what you want to eat. So the kid gets all excited, right? They get to the restaurant. Kid opens the menu, sees this big, delicious, cheesy pizza and says, I want the pizza. And then one of the parents checks in, is like, honey, are you sure? Why don't you get the burger? That's what you
Yeah.
normally get. So the child stops and thinks about it for a moment. Says, oh, yeah, that's kind of true. But sticks to their choice, the pizza.
Of course.
And then that parent checks in one more time. Honey, what if you don't like the pizza? The burger's the safe bet. You like it. So the child stops, thinks about it one more time. They stick to their guns, right? Now the pizza, all excited. And then the other parent chimes in and says, we're not getting the pizza. It's too big. You're not going to eat it all. It's going to be a waste of money. So the child says, okay, I'll get the burger. Now, most people would not recognize that as a traumatic event. But my question to you, Josh, is in that moment, what do you think that child believes about their ability to make decisions?
That's right. Yeah.
Right? Maybe I don't make good choices. Maybe I need to ask other people before I make my decisions. Now, you can say to me, well, what are the chances that little kid had that conscious adult thought? Maybe, maybe not, but we know that they felt something in that moment.
Of course.
What we also know about parenting is that it's pretty consistent over time. So that child probably heard a similar message around school, sports, and whatever other kinds of things. Yeah. So imagine that child sort of in a very covert, unconscious way is hearing this message about their ability to make decisions from the age of 3 to, let's say they leave home at 18, 15 years. Do you imagine over time that child might develop a little bit of a second guessing of themselves, a little bit of internal self-doubt?
Very true.
Not really trusting their emotions, their feelings. Yeah. This wasn't an evil intention on behalf of the parents. They weren't trying to screw anybody up. They were probably just, like you said earlier, parenting with the tools that they had, the tools that they were given, right? So it's not about looking at the parents as being at blame here. It's about looking at all of the factors that existed in that child's life, because this is a child that, as they grow up, might develop some, challenges around their self-esteem and confidence. Not even knowing why.
Absolutely.
Right now they become adults. What kind of friends do you think they gravitate to? What kind of partners do you think they bring into their life from that place of lower self-esteem and not having a lot of confidence? What kind of risks do you think they take in life or don't take?
That's right.
Right. So I use that story to illustrate to people the value and importance of going back into your childhood, not just to look at trauma. That's there. Definitely. Let's shine a light on that. But what are maybe some of those more nuanced things that might have happened in our environment, our culture, our neighborhood, our teachers, our schools, that may have led to us feeling and thinking in ways that here today are no longer useful or helpful?
That's so good. That's so good. I know in my research through trauma, I encountered the terminology of the big T trauma versus the little T trauma.
Right.
And oftentimes people think of trauma in terms of, oh, this person was molested or, this person was severely abused, right? Not realizing that there's also the little T trauma, like you mentioned. And it's so normalized in our culture. It's like your experience with your parents. It's so normalized that for some people, get over it. That's who hasn't been spanked, right?
Totally.
And not realizing how this affects a child's psychological development.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I think that there's 2 points to make there to take that a little bit deeper, or actually a couple of points. One is that, when we use certain words, right? We humans use words to communicate. But oftentimes we forget that the use of a word comes with concepts, comes with emotions. So
meaning.
So even for some people, there is a natural defense mechanism, an unconscious one, to the word trauma. Like, no, not me. Right? Like, because the word trauma comes with so much attached to it. The other thing that happens is that we tend to minimize our experiences of the past, right? Why does that happen? Because the very environments that we're talking about, when we were navigating something difficult as children, we were told to get over it. Everything's fine. What are you crying about? Right? Like, there's nothing to be sad about, right? So we learned through the very same environment to minimize our own needs, right? And so what do you think we're going to do as adults when we're going through something challenging and hard? Oh, this isn't that big of a deal, right? So now the pain is in there, but we're trying to push it away.
Very true.
Right? And so I think that's important to illustrate. I think for some people too, it feels absolutely scary and dreadful to even journey into the past to look at anything.
For sure.
Like, I don't want to pull up any of those memories. Those are painful memories. What are you talking about? Right? Like, why would we go there? I just want to focus on the future. Sure. But you're leaving a lot of data points out. You're leaving a lot of who you are on the table.
Of course. And it's so good. What comes to mind for me, I study a lot of Carl Jung and his work on the archetypes. And I know that a lot of your work in psychology is censored for or catered to entrepreneurs specifically. So this kind of is appropriate for this specific conversation, because one of the archetypes that Carl Jung goes over is what he refers to as the ordinary man. So you have, let's say, the jester and the sovereign, all these different archetypes that are deeply embedded in our psyche. And for the ordinary man, it always was fascinating for me to think of the ordinary man. And when I think of
Mhm.
the ordinary man, I think of someone that never went on to, like you said, pursue their dreams or take those risks. And I remember hearing in the ancient Greeks had this concept of the daemon. I'm not sure if you've ever
Mm.
heard of this, right?
No, no.
So legend has it that the word demon actually comes from the word daemon. That's the story.
Okay.
And the way the story goes is every single person has a daemon, and that is what you are here to
Mm.
pursue. It is a
Mm.
spirit that walks with you throughout your life.
Love it.
For you, it may be the work that you do today as a
Sure.
speaker, as an entrepreneur, as a psychologist, and for me, as a life coach, and all these different things. But everybody has a daemon that they are called to fulfill.
Mhm.
And the story goes that if you do not go out and pursue your daemon,
Mm.
it'll turn on you and
Mm.
turn into a demon
Wow.
and haunt you for the rest of your life.
Powerful.
And that's what the ordinary man
Powerful.
goes through.
Yeah.
It's the little t trauma
Yeah.
of not
Yeah.
trusting his own decisions. And I've had
Yeah.
clients who battled with this,
Yeah.
and it is its own form of
Yeah.
hell.
Oh, yeah.
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 And yeah, I want to hear your perspective
Yeah.
on the person that wants to go down this entrepreneurial path,
Sure.
but they're still battling with these issues
Yeah.
of taking the chance, of
Yeah.
believing in themselves, of limiting beliefs,
Right.
all these different things.
Right.
What advice would you give to someone who kind of boxed themselves in and
Yeah.
basically turned into this archetype of the ordinary man?
Yeah.
And the ordinary man it may look fine on the outside. He works his 9 to 5. He takes care of his family.
Yeah.
He is doing all the right things. He may go to his religious institution every week,
Mhm.
but what people fail to realize is he also has a shadow.
Absolutely. That's beautiful.
And I'm curious to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one of the things that I see as the work in front of me, Josh, is, for years I worked with people that came to me when they were in deep despair, deep depression, deep panic, anxiety, PTSD. I mean, I still work with those folks even today. And, there's something to be said about the person that comes to do the sort of emotional or psychological work who's at the end of the rope, right? At the bottom of the barrel. There's a different way that they listen. There's a different way that they're open to understanding, what it is in front of them that they have to navigate. Then there are certain people that resist.
Yeah.
And not an active resistance, but an unconscious sort of resistance that comes from, the natural ego defenses. We can get into Freud if you want to. Um, I'll share who those people are. And I am those people, right? Like the military service member,
That's right.
the one that wears as a badge of honor, keep moving forward, don't feel emotion, right? First responders, police officers, firemen, people that work in those kind of, things. Again, where the cultural message always is, no room for weakness, right? Emotions don't play a role here. And what I found really interesting a couple of years ago was that I found another set of folks. And again, one that I am, entrepreneurs and business owners. And the reason I actually started to work with business owners and entrepreneurs and CEOs was because of the parallel that I had sort of experienced with these other very driven, we could say type A, willing to do the hard work, right? Wake up early in the morning, right? The grit, that like all of those qualities are there.
Yeah.
But what I realized is like, you're not working with a full palette of colors, or you don't have the full playbook until you understand how your ego works, until you understand how your emotions work, until you understand where your fears and desires are.
That's right.
And what I developed was a way of helping these folks who traditionally pushed away therapy by sort of allowing them to see that by bringing that into the light, they can now be more successful, or lead a better company, or lead themselves and their families better by having access to their past, by having access to a deeper understanding of the unconscious, how that drives them, and bringing that to the conscious, right? So I think with business leaders and such, it's about continuing to lean on the things that are already strengths in them, right? That ability to be unwavering in the face of challenges, but also to then bring some compassion and grace to the path, right? To bring a deeper state of awareness about how their their thoughts and their actions impact those around them, right? And so somehow set out on this path and it's been really well received, right? Of sort of bringing therapy to your modern day, normal man, and helping them become what they've always wanted to be, tapping into that space within them that I think we are all born with, that hunger, that passion to grow, to thrive, to survive, to learn, to expand, and rid ourselves of the unhelpful programming that we received from our parents and teachers and schools and society, so that we can be the very best version of ourselves, not just in business, but in whatever sort of realm we want to step into.
That's so good. That's so good. This example that you brought about, or this teaching point, brings me back to a documentary that I recently saw about Arnold Schwarzenegger. And in that documentary, he talks about, as a docuseries, he talks about his brother and himself growing up basically under the parenting style of his father. And his father was a guy from the war, very hard charging. He would encourage their competitive spirit and would say, "Oh, I bet you can do better," or "I bet," and he'd constantly have that. But one brother, which was Arnold, channeled it into success. Arguably one of the most successful people on the face of the planet in terms of accomplishments and what's praised today.
Totally.
The other brother turned into alcoholism and eventually ended up dying, I believe, in a car crash. And same upbringing, but two different personalities. And Arnold believes that his brother just wasn't wired for the way he was to take that trauma and channel it into his work. And he turned into alcoholism. And I'm really curious about your specific journey. And I know you've been very ambitious and you've gone on this path of always pursuing the next thing. And what was that like for you in terms of taking everything that you had endured and channeling it into, let's say, the archetype of the warrior with you as a Marine? Because I know you went right into that directly after high school. Why? Did you even pursue that in the first place? And a little bit into the psychology of why you went about your life the way that you did.
So I love that story about Arnold and his brother, and the psychologist in me gets really curious as to what other factors might have been at play, right? Yes, we come into the world, with certain types of temperament, right? We come into the world with, certain ways that we're kind of pre-wired, right? But I also believe that our environment just plays a really sort of strong role in how, how we perceive the world. And I'll give you a perfect illustration of that. I've seen children very early on, single, sort of only children. And they, I'm using this particular sort of friend that I have who, when they had their first child, sort of a little bit more on the energetic side. And sometimes kids are that way. I was that way as I was just very curious and like had this hunger for wanting to move around and do things. And then a couple of years later, they had another child, and that child was just a little bit more on the calm, sort of easy side. But what I noticed was that now the message that was being told to the older child is like, "Why are you being such a nuisance? Stop bothering your brother. Stop." Right. And so like, years and like just even 2 or 3 years of this, now the child was really acting out
Yeah. Yeah.
because what's the message he was starting to get by no fault of his own? Like,
Mm.
you're too energetic, you're too much. That wasn't the message before the other brother came around,
Mm.
right? So it's just really interesting,
That's a good point.
again, how, so I'm really curious about,
Yeah. Yeah.
what were the other
Yeah.
dynamics there. But to answer your question, I think that, I grew up in a house where, like, if you spilled a little bit of water at the dinner table,
Mhm.
you got chastised or maybe even hit, right? The message in my home was, we don't tolerate mistakes. Mistakes are not okay, right? Like, it needs to be perfect behavior all of the time, or you receive danger,
Mm.
you receive a threat, you receive pain, right? So, what happens for a child that grows up in any environment where there's a strong message around your value being tied to how you behave or how you act or what you achieve or accomplish? Is that you start to see that you always want to meet that need.
Yeah.
Because for a child, the most valuable sort of an important thing to its survival is the nurturance and love of a parent. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all they're worried about, right? So when receiving that nurturance or love comes associated or becomes associated with how you behave or your worth, that's called conditional love. And now, in order to receive love, you have to act in ways or be in ways that you are expected to act and be.
Yeah.
So, what happened for me was, in order to receive that love and nurturance, I was like, okay, I'll be as perfect as my father needs me to be, or as perfect as my mother needs me to be. But then when I would be that perfect, it almost wasn't enough,
Mhm.
right? Because the message was like, try harder,
Yeah.
right? And it comes from, for most parents, it comes from probably a meaningful place to build your child up to be resilient or to have
Of
grit.
course.
But we don't understand that the child's mind interprets messages differently than adults do. What the child is there hearing is like, oh, no matter what I do, it's never enough.
Mm.
It's never enough.
Yeah.
I'm not enough. Right. So, Josh, for me, I was driven for most of my life from this deep inner sense that I had to go out and accomplish as much as possible because inwardly I felt like I wasn't enough.
Yeah.
Right. Now, that wasn't, that wasn't 100% of the theme, but it was a big part of my theme. So why did I join the military? A part of it was because I wanted to pay back the country for having given my family the freedom, right? To live in this country. But also, as I was getting ready to graduate high school, I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. I felt absolutely lost. And while all of my buddies were getting ready to write their college essays and go off to this college and study law and study medicine, I was like, I don't think I'm not college material. I'm not worth that.
Wow.
It's like, well, maybe the military will take me and that'll look good on my resume for some years. And then that part of me that's like, well, if I'm going to be the best, then I'm going to join the United States Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Sorry for anybody that served in any other branches out there. I'm sure I'll hear about that later. Right, right.
Yeah.
But I came out of the Marine Corps still feeling that deep sense of like, wow, there's pride there, but it's still not enough.
Mm.
Right. Like I need to do more. And so, that's when I sort of transitioned into a career as a fireman and a paramedic. I got through the fire academy. I was top of my class in paramedic school. I just kept going after the honors, the achievements. And yet it's still there was this hole, this gap. And I was halfway through grad school, about to get a doctorate degree and realizing like not a lot of people do that. And I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, this isn't going to fulfill me either.
Mm.
And I had a moment of panic.
Could you imagine? Yeah.
I was just like, oh God, like, am I going to spend the next 20 or 30 years of my life seeking things outside of me to validate me?
Yeah.
Because from what I'm seeing from this vantage point this is a losing game.
Yeah.
I'm living in an illusion.
Mm.
And if I don't figure out like how to shift this thing internally, I'm in big trouble.
Oh yeah.
right? And so that was a big part of my beginning journey in my own therapy, was sort of going to therapy, understanding like, yeah, that a part of the story, the narrative I had about myself of not being worth anything was because of the environment I grew up in, always wanting to try and, be better. I had an older brother that was just kind of like, he would be considered the golden child, did everything right, had his first job when he was 50. And so it was like, oh, I'm not even comparing to him. Right. And so my perception of the world, the lens through which I viewed the world was always, I was less than. And I was here in this dire state, like what I call like a hungry ghost, searching for validation. And no matter how much I achieved, it wasn't working. And so that was the big turnaround point for me, where I realized I have to go inward, take a look at what's happening, and start to shift my narrative.
That's powerful, man. The first thing that comes to mind is the analogy of people climbing up this ladder of success. Oftentimes, when you hear a success, you think of a ladder, climbing up the ladder. And I remember hearing years ago, imagine climbing up a ladder of success, and you're already fearful of heights. And this is a very tall ladder.
It's a tall ladder.
And you finally get to the top of this building that you've been pursuing to get to the top of the success chain, to then look over your shoulder and realize you've been climbing up the wrong building. And that's the epitome of what you just explained. And I think a lot of people fall into this trap. And we can go down so many rabbit holes here. But I have to piggyback off of even your statement with the parenting, the other factors with Arnold. I remember hearing in the world of psychology that no two children ever get the same parent.
Right.
And isn't that something?
Yeah, it is.
You can literally be 1 year apart, but that parent goes about their parenting style one way with the first, as opposed to the second, based off the learning experience or the style.
Or even just little nuanced thing, right? Does this child smile a little bit more than the other one? Because when that child smiles, how does the parent interact?
Exactly.
Oh, with a little bit more of and it's just this kind of reinforcing pattern that develops over.
Of course. So even with your brother, right, being the golden child, he got a different version of your parent, even though you guys may not have all the amount of years apart. But you did get a different version of your parent.
Well, in those early developmental years, and this sort of just came to the surface, probably 6 or 7 months ago, we were sort of sitting at home. My dad was already getting sick with dementia, and we were, I was talking with my brother, and we're sitting by the pool. He had invited us over to his house. And, we had this sort of moment of connection. I said to him, if you have any anger or resentment in your heart for that man, you should probably let it go now. And he was like, no, man, I don't have any of that. And it was like this, like, whoa.
Wow.
The first thing it taught me was like, my view of my father is only through the lens in which I experienced him.
That's right.
Right. My pain lived in my view, my perception, my lens of my father. My brother went on to say, he's like, Dad used to take me fishing when we were in Cuba. Like Dad, like we used to spend time together, right? But that's when we were in Cuba around family, and there wasn't the. So my brother got a very different version during those early pivotal years, and it was just like this, like, oh shit moment, like, oh, right. So like, that sort of just shines light on the importance of us going inward to see what our experience has been of things, to see if it's been accurate, to see where the stories that we have, are they accurate? Sometimes they're not. And for me, a lot of my stories were not accurate, and I wouldn't have known that unless I had taken the time to get curious about my past.
So good. So good. And this brings me to two ideas. I remember, I think it was Wayne Dyer, who said, if you want to change your world, you must change the lens in which you see the world. And another quote that comes to mind is the African proverb, if there's no enemy within, the enemy outside can do us no harm. And it's interesting how these internal narratives that we build up for ourselves. And even when I talk to my mom, for example, I actually had her on a podcast episode, and it was beautiful. It was very healing in a lot of different ways. And talking to my mom, it's like she wasn't aware of 90% of
Right.
what I was going through.
Right.
As in her
Right.
mind, it's
Right. Right.
well, I was
Yeah.
just doing the best that I can, and
Yeah.
I had it rough with my mom, right? And that was nothing compared to
Right.
what she had gone through
Yeah.
in her
Yeah.
lens, right?
Yeah.
But again, depression doesn't discriminate, and no suffering is necessarily more than some. It's just what our experience is,
Mhm.
right? Someone may look at what you've gone through, oh, that's nothing, but your experience is your
It's my
experience.
experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it can have all kinds of
Yeah. Yeah.
consequences. So that's why healing
Yeah.
is so profound.
Yeah.
And
It's so individualistic.
yeah, and it's so individualistic,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's so important not to judge people based off of their experience or
Right.
downplay
Right.
their suffering,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
we were all young, innocent children
Right.
who, I mean, just imagine receiving that parenting style. Sometimes what helps
Totally.
is I look at my children
Mhm.
and I reflect on
Yeah.
if they had experienced what I had experienced, how it would affect them.
Totally.
And I had a situation with my son. I may have mentioned this on one of my episodes. It may have even been with you, but I had an experience with my son probably about a year ago. My kids homeschool,
Okay.
and one of my sons, he kept just giving his teachers a hard time virtually and everything like that, and he wasn't like doing his work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I get frustrated,
Yeah.
and I basically reprimand him and raise my voice at him and just say, you need to do your work and just, and he starts crying.
Yeah.
And it messed me up, man. It messed
I can
me
see it.
up.
Yeah.
It was heavy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the whole day I was just thinking about that,
Yeah.
right? I could have handled it
Yeah.
in a different way and still
Yeah.
got the job
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
And it was bothering me
Yeah.
just reflecting on it, seeing the tears in his eyes. And, it was so painful for him. And, we don't spank our
Yeah.
kids. We just don't believe in it. I believe you can still be a great
Absolutely.
parent without
Amazing.
having to resort to that.
Of
Not
course.
to judge anyone who
Yeah.
does,
Yeah.
but it's been very effective with me
Yeah.
just talking to my
Yeah.
kids, but raising my voice even,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes that cuts even deeper
Yeah.
than the spanking.
Yeah.
And as I was reflecting on it, I said, no, I need to go and I need to apologize to
Mhm.
my son.
Mhm.
And I remember going upstairs to his room and
Beautiful.
saying, hey, I'm sorry for, raising my voice. I just want you to know that daddy loves you and I'm still learning to deal with my emotions.
No.
And I asked for his forgiveness.
That's beautiful,
and
brother.
and we hugged in that
Yeah.
moment. And it was such a beautiful, beautiful
Yeah.
moment for me.
Yeah.
And I didn't want my son to have to heal from me.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right.
It's like we know better.
Yeah.
And we have a
beautiful.
moral obligation
Wow.
to do better.
Wow.
And it's just, it's so important
Yeah.
to just go on this healing journey
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just alleviate yourself of
Sure.
the suffering, right? I'm a firm believer that pain is inevitable, but
Yeah.
suffering is a choice, prolonged suffering.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to stay there.
Yeah, Josh. I usually don't share sort of things that come up for me during my, deep meditations, but there was one time where the intention of the meditation was to go inward and do some healing work around my father. He had already been sick. And so, when you have someone that's going through dementia or Alzheimer's, they're sort of dying while they're still alive, right? And so I was really just allowing myself to grieve as it was coming up. And there was this moment where I sort of went back to an old memory of receiving probably one of the worst spankings that I ever did. Like I had to work on this. I had to do trauma work on this in therapy, using EMDR for anyone that's familiar with that. But it was just the time that I experienced my father in his most violent form. And when I sort of allowed myself to soften, right, to soften the fear, the hurt, and the pain, the image that came up for me was that as my father was spanking me, in his hand was his pain.
Mm-hmm.
the pain of losing his brother, the pain of all of the suffering that he had to go through, the pain of never having been able to talk about it.
Wow.
Right. And it was just this connection like this, right? Like they say that, trauma runs in the family until somebody is willing to feel it. And I just sort of saw myself then as a sponge,
Wow.
receiving his pain, and my heart like, opened up, because I know that in his heart of hearts, that wouldn't be the way he wanted to be a father.
Of course.
Right.
Of course.
And that's the value of doing this work.
Yeah.
It's the work on ourselves for other people.
Yeah.
Right. The work I need to do on me is so that I can be the most loving and compassionate therapist. I can be the most available father, partner, friend. And the ripple effect that we can send out into the world when we're no longer living from a place of holding on to bitterness, anger, resent, hatred.
Yeah.
We become a light, we become a vessel, we become a vehicle for other people's healing and liberation. But we can't do that if we're caught up in all of our own stuff still.
So true.
And the best way to access that stuff is right therapy, a book, just whatever work it takes to work on yourself. Do that and have that available to you.
Absolutely. And in the world of psychology, you oftentimes hear that if you don't heal from those who've cut you, you'll bleed on those who don't.
Absolutely.
And
I see it every single day.
yeah, yeah.
I see it every
It's
single day.
powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Now, I know that spirituality has been a big part of your healing modality.
Yeah.
Like that's been a great source for you.
Yeah.
And before you even got to that place, I know that there was also this aspect of your life, your private life during the success achieving, where you were kind of dancing in the dark a little bit. And I've had my seasons.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I want to hear about
Yeah.
that. I have to showcase that
Yeah.
aspect of your just amazing, colorful life,
Yeah.
because there's just
Yeah.
so many layers and
Thank
it's so vibrant. And for me, even the dark aspects of it, even the moments of your life
Yeah.
where you kind of lose yourself,
Yeah.
where you fall into materialism or consumption or just partying, toxic behavior, all of these different things,
Yeah.
they all, like you mentioned, it's a woven tapestry that ultimately comes together on your healing journey. But I would love it if you could just share some of the ways these toxic tendencies kind of manifested themselves in your private life.
Yeah. Yeah. I can only really experience the world even now from the place that I see it. Right. And so you probably asked me this question in 10 years and I'll give you a totally different answer.
course.
But I can share from where I am now that for so many years when I felt absolutely lost, like lost in terms of work, lost in terms of relationships, lost in terms of like spiritually, I now recognize I was never lost. So that was right on time. I was on purpose. All of that was necessary. I couldn't find myself if I was not lost.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of years of being lost and in lots of darkness. So for folks that don't know my story, I've, there's been depression, there's been anxiety. I dealt with a diagnosis of bipolar for many years, where I'd have these huge fluctuations in depression and then these very manic times where I was just on top of the world, and then these deep crashes again where I was on the brink of suicide. The way I sort of chose to cope, before therapy and, even a while that I was on medication, was drinking. Right. And so I've had some of my darkest moments with, just a bottle in front of me, trying to escape the demons and trying to escape pain and hurt. I think, just to speak to the spiritual piece, I grew up in a Catholic home, and, I did my communion, I was baptized. I went to Sunday school, but my parents, there wasn't like God wasn't in those things. It was just rituals that we sort of did because that was our faith, right?
Embodying the
Yeah,
essence of
yeah, yeah. But God was missing from it.
course.
And so I think that around the age of 17 or 18, I started to realize that there were questions that were coming up for me and my curious mind that faith or Catholicism or Christianity wasn't answering.
Mm.
I think I was also deeply tainted by, the stories of you know, priest and what they were doing to children, like the
Of course.
hypocrisy of it
Of
all,
course.
right? And I want to acknowledge that in any faith, in any spiritual, in any
Absolutely.
aspect,
Any organization.
right? There's light and there's dark.
Oh, yeah.
But I was deeply, just disillusioned by it, and so what that led me to was this sort of time in my life where I started to question everything from a spiritual perspective. I'd say, like, if I was going to give myself a label, I became agnostic and
Yep.
was just like, I don't, believe in anything. And then I actually moved into this like righteous atheism. I mean, I was very dogmatic about my atheism, right? Like nothing exists. It doesn't matter. And I have to be honest, Josh, I think there was a time where like, I remember that there was this day, I was like, oh, so if there isn't this God watching over every one of my actions every day, judging me, oh, that feels pretty liberating.
Yeah.
I like this atheism stuff. Like, good, right? Like, I don't have this big eye watching over me. I think my sort of my faith needed to evolve in some ways, but
For
that's
sure.
that's where I was, and I sort of honor that now. Um, I think I went for a lot of years just really believing that that that's all that there was. It's just what's unfolding in front of us. And as a scientist and a doctor, that because I was very sort of informed, from the schools I went to and the books that I was reading. Um, and then there was a shift, and I'll share the story of when that shift kind of happened. I'm experiencing even now just this hesitation, and if I give a name to it, it's shame.
Yeah.
Right, like shame is coming up for me about what I'm about to share. But I was mentioning earlier how I used to drink quite a bit to cope. And when I first moved to Tampa back in 2016, I was here alone. I had just come off of a year of really deep depression. Um, Actually, let me go back a step so that people can understand that. When I came out of grad school, I went to do some consulting work in Cincinnati, Ohio. I really enjoyed the work, but I was alone and didn't like the company I was working for and just fell into this depression. So I was like, I'm going to go back home. I'm going to go back to Miami. I'm going to go be around my family and sort of regroup. Right.
Yeah.
I was almost 40. And I went back to Miami with my doctorate degree and my wonderful resume at this point in my life, right? And it was like, don't worry, I'll get a job when I get down there. It's all going to be okay. And that was a year of my life where I call it, gut check. The universe wanted to teach me some humility. I went back to Miami and I couldn't find a job.
Yeah.
I had to move back in with my parents, sleeping in the same room that I grew up in, like this toxic environment.
Dark night of the soul.
Dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
And at the time, I didn't see it as one of the most healing times in my life where I got to rebuild my relationship with my parents in a very, very powerful way. But yeah, everything sort of just kind of fell out. I was at the bottom of the barrel once again, lost once again, and didn't know what the hell I was going to do with myself. And a couple of weeks before moving to Tampa for a new job that I had gotten here, I was at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, essentially interviewing for a job to wash cars. Right. And so, I learned a lot of humility during that time. So anyway, I finally moved, I'm starting to feel better about myself. I'm starting to recoup, climb that ladder again. But I was still drinking pretty heavily. And one day I got pulled over after driving home from a bar where I just had a couple of beers. I mean, but I probably shouldn't have been driving. And I get pulled over by an undercover cop. I was probably driving a little faster than I needed to be. And I get pulled over and he asks me for my license and he checks it and gives it back to me and says, just slow down and be careful. And the sad part, Josh, was that that wasn't the first time that had happened to me. It was probably the 10th or 15th that I had had an occurrence of that nature. Not always with police, but definitely situations where I shouldn't have been driving or alcohol was, And in that moment, before I peeled back onto the highway, I thought to myself, okay, you're a scientist by right, but like statistically speaking, there is no way, Carlos, that you've put yourself in this many dangerous situations and you haven't killed anybody, you haven't killed yourself, you haven't gotten a DUI, nothing negative has happened. If you still want to believe that there isn't a force out there bigger than you, go ahead and do it. That's right. Yeah. But in that moment, I couldn't. And that was a seed. That was a seed that sort of opened me up and said, okay, that atheism, I don't know. I need to get really curious and open myself up again. And then fast forward a couple of years, I had already started my business and my practice. Things were going well, but that little monster of you're not enough was starting to show up again. And I had this really beautiful opportunity put in front of me where a buddy of mine said, "Hey, look, I know this Marine. He is putting an organization together to take some other veterans down to Costa Rica on an ayahuasca retreat." And I had heard about ayahuasca and I'd heard about, plant medicine and how you can go into deeper levels of consciousness and really do some of the darker work. And, the curious part of my mind was like, I have to try this, right? Like I need to dive in and see what's there. The other part of me was scared shitless, obviously, about, what I was going to find or what was still there to work on. But in the summer of 2021, I went down to Costa Rica for an 8-day retreat.
So this was, okay. About 3 years ago?
About 3 years ago, not very long. It's still pretty fresh. And I mean, it's just, for anybody that has worked with plant medicine, it just changed so much, right? It deepened my, I wouldn't even say my understanding or belief anymore, but my knowing. Yeah. My knowing of what's out there, my knowing of the depth of the infinite wisdom of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I was conflicted because you obviously know about the last episode, and it just vanished. And I've never gone public about my ayahuasca ceremonies, about me even taking people to help them on their healing journeys, because I always personally had a fear of being scrutinized. And unfortunately, the people who scrutinize the most are faith-based people. And it hurts, it hurts when, they're accusing you of engaging in witchcraft. They're accusing you of, doing something that's demonic. And it's like to experience something so beautiful.
Yeah.
Something so sacred. And to have the world, it's, even though that's not your truth, it hurts. It hurts. And this was the first time that I ever went public with it. And then when the episode just vanished, I said, man, is there something here? Was I not supposed to talk about it? Is that what God ultimately?
I actually thought the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what?
I guess we'll know if this episode vanishes also.
That's right. That's right. But I looked at it like, you know what? Maybe we can go deeper.
Yeah.
Maybe we can give a little bit more context.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe that was the sign. And I had to step out in courage to just say, I need to just talk about the experience. Now, I spoke a little bit before this interview just about the dark side of that, how it can go to the extreme and actually hurt people.
Yeah.
Right. But just like yourself, it's been truly a blessing for me. And I personally went out to do it in the purest form, right? With authentic shamans who've been practicing this sacred tradition, for many, many years. And one thing that I can say is it enhanced and heightened my perspective on life. It brought me a great sense of peace. It brought me a great sense of meaning. I got divine instruction on what to do. And yeah, people can go and say, "Oh, that's not of God." Well, I don't know. One thing that I can say is you can judge a tree by the fruit that it bears. And my life has been just blessed in so many ways since experiencing it, right? Can't speak for all people,
Yeah.
but how has that been for you? Just kind of even just talking about
Yeah.
this, right? Because some people are like, whoa,
Yeah.
that's a lot. Or even for you, being a scholar, being a scientist, and talking about
Yeah.
this for some,
Yeah.
you can very well get ostracized and right. And how have you navigated
Yeah.
through this? And if you can give a little bit more insight as to how it's helped you,
Sure.
that would be great.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I think I had sort of the same thing come up. Like, maybe we weren't supposed to talk about that. But I think you're right. I think it was like, maybe let's talk about it from a place of more love and compassion. For sure. This is not something I talk about in most podcasts or on any of my Bloom appearances. All things. Sort of intentionally save it for the spaces where I know it can be heard.
Of course.
Now that being said, just for audience members out there, know that there are no words. No words that exist in the English language, no words that exist in any language. We are not that evolved that I can ever use to capture that experience.
Yeah. I agree.
So what I'm about to say, they're just words. Ron Dass talks about, speaking about spirituality and that space as the finger pointing at the moon, but it's not the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So all of these words are fingers pointing at the moon. You know, I saw a clip the other day on Instagram where Carl Jung was being asked about his belief of God. And he sort of gets confused. He goes, "No, it's not about belief. I know."
Yeah.
Right. And when I was on my retreat, I met just a beautiful soul of a man, my dear friend, Michael. He'd been on several experiences before. And one of the things he said to me one day during a very intimate conversation, because I think after experience that, I was trying to find the words. He's like, "Carlos," he goes, "it's one thing to understand something here and to understand it here." He goes, "That is the farthest distance you will ever travel in your life."
That's right.
And I was like, absolutely. Right. So like what I experienced, my experience of God, if we like even just using that word, capture, like it captures, it doesn't capture the essence of it. Right.
Of course.
There's this beautiful quote that I've sort of stumbled upon, soon after my experience. And it says, a God defined is a God confined.
Mm.
So in the very breath that you try to explain God, you've already lost the essence of what God is.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
But what I experienced in my inner being during that time was something that was so profound and deep that I no longer needed to question anything.
Mm-hmm.
It was beyond the mindset. It was beyond that. It was an inner knowing
For sure.
that it just gave me this reassurance about the world.
Yeah.
About what it's all about what the hell we're all doing here.
Yeah.
Right.
Very.
And I like what you said there that, people could have their opinions about whether, but if that wasn't meant by God, then it wouldn't exist.
That's right.
Because everything that is in existence is meant by God.
That's right.
Right. The dark, the light, the all of it. And, we can get into a conversation about who this stuff is for and who it's not. I would say to people, it's not, it's something to be mindful of. It's not for everybody.
Yeah.
Not all plant medicines are, not all therapy is,
Of course.
so, um, but what I can tell you happened for me was this breaking open, right? Um, I talk about having been pulled so far out of my um, experience, my mind, um, so far out of my reality that I was left. I was like, I left being like, "Oh, Carlos, you don't know anything.
Yeah.
Your mind is tiny and primitive compared to what is out there,
Yeah.
right?" And so what are you spending all of your days worried and trying to control, you silly human, right? It was there's like there was this charm to it. There was this comedy to it. But what I can tell you it's done for me is deepen my ability to be centered, to be present, to be compassionate, to be loving, to be Christ-like, to be Buddha-like. It put before me a path of love and compassion that I want to walk like every single day. I can't. This is probably why I don't talk about it as much because I can tap into a space in myself where it's all beautiful, it's all empty, it's all there, it's all pure, and it's all love.
Yeah.
And the work has been the last 3 years. How do I incorporate that into my day-to-day life as this human full of flaws and the part of our egos that are just naturally a part of this human condition that wants to strive and wants money and wants and also pulling myself away from that and living in a place of full surrender.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Thank you for even, sharing that. And, I like to study the saints, and the saints are so profound. I'm not sure if you've ever studied into any of them. One of my favorite saints is Saint Thomas Aquinas. And one of his teachings is, and he was a mystic, but also very scholarly and such a profound soul that has walked this planet. And one thing that Saint Aquinas would say is, God isn't ultimately a being. And that's the issue. Because even from an atheist standpoint, a secular standpoint, it's like you're trying to examine and quantify and measure a being. What Aquinas says is God is being itself. The process of being is God. And I agree wholeheartedly with you.
Yeah.
It's the dark, it's the light, it's everything.
Yeah.
It's existence itself.
Yeah.
And for me, my experience was, I love the idea. I think the phrase is omnism. Omnism, if I'm not mistaken, I may be wrong here, but it essentially states that religion isn't necessarily truth, but there is truth in all religion. And sometimes these accusations, I always take a grain of salt and, I'm like, okay, there's an element of truth there. It's like, yeah, can it be this realm of demonic? Absolutely. Is there some truth? Yeah, I don't think that that's the solution for everyone, because I remember hearing early on that Mother Ayahuasca is not something that you just go to do for fun. Like, she calls you. And I was called, 29 years old. I was called to the mother, and I felt it and I saw what it did to people and the level of darkness that would come out of them. And for whatever reason, there was a part of me that said, I need that, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Because what a lot of people didn't know about my respective journey is, I went through over 20 years of PTSD, deeply, just traumatic experiences that I had saw. I was exposed to murder. I was exposed to drug overdoses. I grew up in the murder capital.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of nightmares, like almost every day for many, many years.
Yeah.
And when I had heard about ayahuasca especially from people that I admired and respected and looked up to, and how profound it was for their life, and doing my research and everything. And I said, you know what? I feel called to do this. So what did I do? I didn't know anyone personally that I personally knew who had gone on to do it.
Wow.
And I did a solo trip around the world. I completed, I remember at the time, I had this vision of doing all the wonders of the
Yeah.
world and
Yeah.
all of the inhabited continents. And the last stop was Peru. And, I had set it up. I said, I want to do it for some reason. I said, I want to open up my 30s in a brand new chapter.
Yeah.
I want to close this chapter of this PTSD and all these different things. Like, what if this can help me?
Mm.
So
Mm.
my intentions were pure.
Yeah.
And we spoke about how it can become a negative thing when it starts to get commercialized.
Sure.
And it's like it's done in the wrong context and everything, and not from a genuine space of healing.
Right.
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 I don't think that ceremonial experience should just be for the experience. It should genuinely be for healing,
Yeah.
for perspective, for clarity. And you mentioned Michael. My guy was a guy by the name of Mark.
Mm.
And in fact, I still wear this bracelet he gave me. Mark was a gentleman. He was a healer. And he also felt called. And it's interesting because when I experienced my ceremony, I was thrown into the abyss.
Mm-hmm.
Hell, it's like what I experienced. There's no word that can capture the essence of what I experienced. It was like beyond hell. You could not fear hell after what I had experienced. And to be in a space where I felt vulnerable, I felt confused, I felt lost, I felt like, what am I doing here? I made a big mistake. I'm here on the other side of the world. I've got 3 kids and I'm here and I'm all alone. And it was just Mark and I. And Mark couldn't even engage the second day because he wasn't feeling well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I was thrown into the abyss and I was in an interdimensional realm. And that's why I agree with you. You can't really put it into words what I saw, but it was beyond terrifying. It was beyond confusion. And it was ultimately necessary. I had to be put into this darkness, if you will, and buried. And I had to come out of it liberated from anything that could ever bring fear to my life. And there were abstract teachings. There were hidden messages. There were ways of just seeing my life and everything that I had encountered. And I encountered a lot. I found my father in the Sacred Valley there with me. I I saw how his life was a sacrifice, how he took on generations of trauma, of darkness, and took it all in his lifetime to liberate me, my sons, to do what we have to do. It's like he took it all in his lifetime. The heroin addictions, being shot 3 different times, seeing his cousin murdered, who was his best friend at 14 years old. I saw his body deteriorate and just everything. He took it all, like every element. And for the very first time in my life, my father's life for me it had meaning. I felt proud to be able to say to my children that his life meant something. It truly meant something. And we have a moral obligation to do right. We have a moral obligation to help people to heal and to live well, to break those generational cycles. And that's why it's hurtful for me. When people say these things, and I remember going through my dark night of the soul. I had people like sending me YouTube clips on people saying these negative things. And I was confused afterwards because, there's this integration process that happens.
Yeah.
Afterwards, you have to get back integrated into society. And I'm here being told that, oh, this is the work of the devil and all this. And, here I am now just confused and like, man, am I being reeled into
Yeah.
this world? And then what, it was the most beautiful thing that I ever experienced. And yes, there was an element of darkness, but it was necessary for my healing. It was necessary for my transformation. It was necessary for my perspective. How could you tell me that it was evil? How could you tell me that it wasn't valuable? How could you tell me that, I'm engaging in something that is ultimately demonic when all I felt was love, unconditional love.
Right.
So I thank you for holding space for me to be able to just share this experience because I've never shared it before. And I feel like that last episode, what happened for a reason. I had to share this part. And thank you. Thank you. I truly appreciate you for that.
Um, yeah, what a beautiful story, brother. And let me tell you that I thank you for, because I think when I went, it was, there was a little bit more familiarity with it. I went with a group of veterans. It was, I think it was just a little bit more known about it. And I thank you for paving the way for my own experience, right? For having stepped into the sort of courage and the fear to dive into that space. And the reason I'm tearing up as I'm hearing your story, because mine was so similar, right? I had 4 ceremonies while I was gone on those 8 days, and probably 2 that were, I mean, I think it was all profound, but 2 that were really fascinating. One of them was, this moment where, um, yeah, I think it's all intentional. All of the work that we go do there is for us, and even if we get called into that space, it's for us. And one of my ceremonies was just utter brilliance, man. It was like tapping into pure love, like pure compassion. Like I felt loved in a way that a human could never feel, right? It was just all beautiful, all light, all just, I remember during that evening getting pulled out sort of like, into space and just recognizing the infinite nature of love, in all directions, right? And just sort of developing the deepest level of compassion for myself and all other beings, right? Like just a deep trust that everything that is happening moment to moment is utterly perfect.
Yeah.
And I'm really just absolutely glad that I got shown that on the first night, because the second night right after,
You get your ass handed to you. Same.
darkness,
Yeah.
fear,
Same.
pain,
Yeah.
guilt, shame. Like I thought I was losing my mind and going crazy. It was a moment where I was like, oh, this is where I die.
Yeah.
This is where it's over.
Same. Same.
And there was nobody that was going to help me. I mean, there was this beautiful guide, a facilitator who helped me navigate that space, but it's like, oh, I'm on my own here.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was just like my body wanted to jump out of my skin. And I've never experienced so much fear and dread and darkness. And it wasn't just my own, it was of our humanity and just like, and at the end of the 4 or 5 hours, as it started to dissipate and as I started to sort of gain my wits about me again, I remember looking up at the moon and just uttering the words, I surrender. Like, I surrender. I'm not in control.
Wow.
I am here to serve. And that, right? I mean, we could call it little, we could call it big, but that little shift is what I try to embody every day in my life now, right?
It's beautiful.
How do I do the work on myself to remind myself every day that it's not about me, that it's about what I can give, that it's about me
bringing my story of walking through my darkness, years of being lost, years of darkness, years of all of the things that we've been through, just as you shared in your own story, so that we can just be even a glimpse, a small, tiny glimpse of light for somebody that might need it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? How do we walk our path in the most honorable, respectful, and loving way so that we can show others that there is something different than what we experience here on the earthly plane, if you will?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's so beautiful. And to bring it full circle with just our ayahuasca ceremonies, I remember Mark, he was actually, he's on this path of becoming a healer. And he was one of those people that had all this material success, kind of like yourself, and just felt called to something higher. And he just was very conflicted. He went through his dark night of the soul, and he felt called to heal people.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that second night when I got my ass handed to me. I know exactly what you're talking. They sort of like prime you out, right? And you're like, oh, this is amazing.
This is great.
I guess I'm exempt.
Well, you know what I did the second time was ego got a hold of me. It was like, oh, I want more of that. Let me have a second dip.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, welcome. Come on in.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Same exact thing happened to me. Oh, I'm good, right? Like, oh, that's not much healing that has to take.
Right.
Boy, was I wrong.
Yeah.
I got my ass handed to me. And I remember Mark couldn't engage in the second, and it was just him and I for whatever reason. And usually there's, a group of at least 10 people there.
Sure.
And it was just the shaman and I. And when I went into, I call it the abyss. And I was there and I was like, oh,
yeah.
Okay, pushed it too far. Because, we engaged in a lot of it. I pushed it too far this time.
Yeah.
And just like you said, I was like, this is where I die and surrender.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was just trapped, I'm like, oh man, did I just, buy my own ticket right to hell? And I started to come out of it. And I called for Mark. Mark wasn't there in he was out in his room, and they said, he's in the room. I said, get Mark. He'll know. He'll understand. And I'll never forget, he helped me, like just his presence, his loving energy. And I was receiving these downloads to even share with him.
Yep.
Like, you are called to be a healer.
Beautiful.
This is your initiation right here, right? This is a sign, like you were called. That's why you're, even though you didn't engage in this ceremony, divine intervention, if you will, all orchestrated just for you to share this moment, to heal this young brother from everything in that. And it's so crazy because I exchanged contacts with Mark, and he gives me this bracelet. He wanted to just share that moment. And I literally probably wear this almost every day of my life till this day. And I went to look for Mark in my phone and never found his number again. And there was a part of me that was a bit sad because I wanted to keep the communication going. There was also that part of me that's like, he was an angel. He was what I needed in that moment of despair.
Yeah. I think I had a similar experience, but I think what we're talking about here, right, is whether it's ayahuasca, whether it's any kind of plant medicine, whether it's faith, or whether it's having been through something traumatic, whether it was the having of a child, the losing of a child. I think this greater power, whether we want to call it God or Christ consciousness, or this thing, it puts the work in front of us, and it's just our job to step in, right? Like my stepping into that darkness showed me what I'm capable of. I lost my fear of death that night.
That's right. Same.
Right. And what I learned about myself, that lives with me every moment of every day, and every conversation I have, and every piece of advice that I give, and every right? In everything I do. But what I've learned, Josh, as I came in and did some of the integration work, I started deepening my, my relationship and experience with Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Christianity. Now, again, coming sort of back full circle. And as I've, experienced some of these things and read the scriptures and the books, what I'm realizing more and more is that there's this just beautiful world of experiences that allow us to do the work that we need to do to heal ourselves,
For sure.
and to find ourselves and to liberate ourselves.
Absolutely.
And so for folks out there that might be healing, like, well, I don't know about ayahuasca, know that isn't the only way.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
That for some people, it happens again after a loss, being at the bottom of the barrel, a car accident, whatever it may be. We just have to sort of tap in, quiet down the mind that is constantly grabbing at things in life to see what is next. Like, where am I supposed to be next? Well, maybe that's therapy. Maybe it's a book. Maybe it's a motivational seminar, right? Maybe it's going 20 or 30 years of building a business and getting all the way to the top of that ladder to look around and be like, fuck, what did I do?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the path for you, right? I'm not here to judge. I'm saying honor it all. If it's in front of you, it's for you. And so just embrace that as, for what it is, because it's going to guide you to that next place where you need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And have the courage to press on. And I mentioned to you that it wasn't the ayahuasca that had stopped the dreams or the nightmares, if you will. And when I tell you these were very, very dark nightmares, it was a hypnotherapy session. Right. And, there were so many different parts of the journey that kind of led up to it. So like you mentioned with ayahuasca, it's not necessarily everybody's cup of coffee. And I do believe that you have to be very careful going into that. You have to go with the right intentions. You have to, if you have any type of schizophrenia or anything like this, or clinical depression, right? There's a purifying process even going into it.
Absolutely.
Right. So, and you can very well get healing from a lot of different modalities. For me, it has been a combination of the personal development, even entrepreneurship, like you mentioned, which I'm happy you did, and going through all of the scriptures, whether it be the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, like all of these books, and then, like you said, come back full circle. To even Christianity, right? Because just like your walk, I became agnostic, started out Catholic, right? And became agnostic, and then just kind of started to explore with all types of faiths, and I'm so happy that I did. I'm so happy that I did, because now when you hear people say things, right, or they try to demonize your walk, you're speaking from a place of experience. I've walked this walk. You can talk about it all day long, but have you experienced it? Have you seen what I've seen? Right. And what I've seen, no matter if it's New Age, no matter if it's Islam, no matter if it's Judaism, like, I've seen great love. I've seen great love across the board. And I want to bring it to psychology and the intertwining of psychology and spirituality, where the psychology hit its wall. Because you and I spoke about even a client of yours who sort of just hit their wall, where the modalities, the tools just aren't enough. Right. From a scientific standpoint, where would you say psychology itself? Just like, this is, you can get up to here, but then, when great suffering comes about in your life, how do you navigate through that?
It's a great question. I think, I think the field has a long way to go. I think traditionally the field of psychology came about as a way to work with or assist people that were struggling with, schizophrenic episodes. If we go sort of way back, people that were crazy or having, um, and traditionally with the field, the way the field has viewed sort of healing is like, okay, if this is our baseline and you're depressed or anxious or having some kind of neurochemical, overabundance not enough of then you start to experience below the norm, right? So abnormal behavior,
For sure.
right? OCD, right? Like all of these different things. And, it's evolved over time. But what the field has traditionally seen it as is like we take you from being abnormal to normal, back to baseline. Where I want to see psychology go and where I think it's been going for a lot of years is like, how do we take you from baseline to an elevated level, to live your best life possible, to navigate your thoughts and emotions and behaviors in a very healthy and just in a way that can bring about joy and peace, right? So I think we still have a lot of work to do there. There's, still a lot of stigma that we need to sort of move past. I think we're doing a much better job these days. But one of the things that I've started to weave into my work that has been a result of my experience with spirituality, where before I felt compelled to move somebody past their darkness, past their depression, past their suffering, I now recognize that there is a very good possibility that that suffering was sent to them for a reason. That it might not be my job to relieve their suffering, because I don't even know why it's there.
For sure.
So instead of working to relieve your suffering, why don't I be a vehicle to help you learn how to navigate suffering?
That's right.
Because it's not a thing to heal. See, when we move away from this dualistic sense that we should always be happy, always be okay, always be fine, we push away the majority of our life experience. We push away fear. We push away sadness, grief, shame, something that is common to all of us. If you take a human existence at some point inevitably, you're going to feel all of it.
For sure.
And how beautiful that we get to do that. But as a culture, I think we've moved into this, like, how do I protect myself from ever feeling sad or angry right? Like, I don't want that because it doesn't feel good. So I think that's where psychology can take us. It can help us shift some mindset things. It can help us have some tools to, navigate emotions in different ways. But I think what we need to further contribute to it is, how do we teach people to just honor all that life is? Honor, like, my father just passed. That's deeply painful to me. That's not a thing to fix. His loss, the pain of not having his love, that's not a thing to fix. It's perfect. And so how do I allow space for that in my life every day? The pain and the hurt of that. And at the same time, look at my son growing up, my opportunity now to be a father, and like have deep appreciation. Deep gratitude. Deep happiness. All in the same moment. Like, that's what I think life is about. Opening yourself up to all of just the we've used the word tapestry today, but the palette, all of the flavors that is this human existence.
Absolutely.
It's not a thing to be healed or fixed. It's a thing to be experienced. I think what psychology has taught us is that we, a lot of us grew up in environments where we were told to not feel certain things. Maybe because our parents were uncomfortable with the negative emotions or feelings. And so a lot of the work I do with my clients is like, let me help you learn how to navigate this space here. How to find a place of equanimity, a place of calmness, even in the darkness.
I love that.
Right? How do we find light even in the dark?
Hmm. Yeah, that's so beautiful, brother. It's it's interesting, with psychology because I geek out about psychology all the time. I can go for hours, neuroscience, everything about the brain and,
Yeah.
the archetypes and all these things, the subconscious. As it pertains to, we spoke a little bit about living a secular life.
Mhm.
We spoke a little bit about, what that looks like. What do you feel or do you even feel like there are any negative consequences to just not having any belief whatsoever in a higher power,
Yeah.
right? Because I think that there are a growing number of people who are starting to lean more to as science becomes more prevalent,
Sure.
right? People are sort of downplaying the role of faith, but I don't know if you feel the same way. I feel like it's the perfect time for faith to sort of emerge,
Mhm.
to give some structure,
Yeah.
to give some guidance, because there's so many young people right now just battling with mental health
Yeah.
issues. The pandemic has had a negative effect on so many people. A lot of
Yeah.
people have leaned more towards an atheistic way of life, and not to demonize,
Sure.
anyone who maybe they're on that journey right now.
Sure.
But where do you feel like that hits its
Yeah.
wall?
Yeah. There's so many different ways I can go with this, but I'll just kind of share what's coming up for me. I think that in a lot of ways, the like the foundations of faith and religion come from a good place in terms of intention. Most of them do. If you really dig into and go far back enough, they were written or they came about as a way to help guide us, as a way to help us love more, as a way to help us connect with that thing beyond us. I think what tends to happen is our humanness foils it all, right? Our greed, our avarice, our ego, our unmet desires and needs polarize it just in the same way as it does in politics, polarizes religion.
Yeah,
And right, like, well, this helped me heal. So come here.
sure.
Let me show you
Yeah.
how, because you need healing.
Yeah.
Well, I just judged you because I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what path you're on. And one of the things that I would say that I've really learned on the spiritual path is that I don't know. Right? Think about how primitive our understanding of the world was 100 years ago, 500 years ago.
Yeah.
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 Right. There was a time we thought we were the only,
Very true.
right. That the whole
Universe
universe
revolved.
revolved around us. Right. Where's it going to be another 400 or 500 years? People are going to look back and hear this conversation and like, look at those two dummies.
That's right.
How much they didn't know.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I do know is that I don't know Jack.
Yeah.
So even
So
from the
good.
place of which I'm speaking now, it's so limited by my primitive mind,
Yeah.
right? That I mean, we humans have been in existence for a speck of dust
Yeah.
in the evolution
Yeah.
of time, right? So I think that we need to be mindful of how we bring our judgments
So good.
to where people need to be and where they are and what religion and whether they're in the dark or they're in the light. Like maybe that's where God absolutely wants everything to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And that I believe, like I trust in that in a place so deep within myself. So who am I to judge?
Very true.
Which just sort of further illustrates, I think, the deepest or biggest sort of theme today, which is you take the time to do your work on you.
Yeah.
That the way we heal the world is I'm not out here healing the world. I'm out here like putting all of my energy and effort to continue to heal myself.
That's right.
Because the less avarice, the less greed, the less lust lives within me, the more free I am.
So true.
The more free I am to be a vehicle for love and compassion and forgiveness.
Definitely.
And if I can not judge you and your path and be forgiving and open up a space to learn from you and for us to heal together, man, what's the kind of ripple effect that we can set out into the world?
So good.
Past politics, past religion, past all of the ways in which we create friction for ourselves.
Yeah, that's so beautiful and spot on. I remember hearing from a priest recently. He said the issue that most people have today, whether you're a person of faith or even an atheist, the issue is, like you mentioned, thinking that we know God.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
God is so expansive. And I remember I was learning from a guru many years ago, and he would always say that our knowledge only of the universe is less than 4%, right? So he says, why in the world would you identify with 4%? Says, identify with your ignorance, not with your intellect, because there's so much more we don't know than we do. It's so limiting to just box yourself into what you can quantify, what you can measure,
What you can see, what you can feel, what
see,
you can touch.
feel and touch.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so amazing. Now, man, I know we're gonna have to bring it in for a landing here shortly, but I wanted to bring things full circle. I know we've been referencing, this idea of bringing things home, and I want to talk about faith as it pertains to even the family dynamic. I think what we're struggling with right now, as a nation, as a society,
Yeah.
is the family dynamic, the
Yeah.
family principles,
Yeah.
and all of that. And you reference Christianity coming back full circle, and that's essentially what happened for me.
Sure.
I started to have to navigate through these family things, and it's a contact sport. And yeah, a lot of hard conversations,
Yeah.
a lot of just this floods of emotions that you get washed with. And that's where my walk with and for me, I don't even like to use the word Christianity because there tends to be a certain stigma around it. I more so consider myself a follower of the Christ, right? I'm more interested in embodying a Christ-like nature than just being a part of a religion, right? It's so much deep. It's so much more deeper than that. Like you referenced, even with your family, right? It's like, yeah, religion is great, right? But when it's all said and done, are you embodying that?
Right.
And me learning about, other ways of expressing this and embodying it and integrating it into the family dynamic. And there's a lot of ways we go about it. With our children, for example, we teach prayer and meditation. Prayer, speaking to God; meditation, listening to God.
Well,
And, we'll take them to church because that's a great way to bring our family together. And it's been an anchor for us. So just preserving the family more than anything, but also teaching them about this teacher that has walked the earth and his teachings, his principles, what he embodied, right? The history of it, the richness of it. Going deeper, not being so surface with it. I wanted to wrestle with God. I as the word Israel, the true definition of it. I wanted to wrestle with God, and I've been wrestling for a lot of years, Dr. Carlos.
I love that.
A lot of years. He's not going to get a light fight from me. I've been fighting my whole life, so we're going to wrestle here. I want to know you at the deepest depths.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's been very beneficial for my family.
Yeah.
The integration of it. Right. Going about it in my way. After experiencing the buffet of beauty when it comes to faith, right? For you, I'm curious to hear a little bit about what's working for you today from a psychological standpoint, the principles, and because there's value in that. Knowing, like, even for my kids, teaching them about their emotions, teaching them about trauma. It's interesting. One of my sons had encountered a bully, and believe it or not, it was in the church. And he was a part of, like, the youth ministry thing. And, a kid had said, called him a name or whatever. And my middle son, he says, don't worry about that. He says, some kids don't always grow up with the best families. And, and this is my 6-year-old child just having the understanding that this is a wounded little boy that's trying to bully my son, right? And so the teachings of psychology, the tools, the strategies, the modalities, but also the integration of spirituality on things like navigating through suffering, navigating through great loss, the daily practice of it, whether it's prayer, whether it's meditation, whether it's scriptures, whether it's whatever, right? How are you going about it today? And what would you honestly even recommend? Is it a one size fits all? Is it a silver bullet? Is it like this specific way?
Yeah.
What would you recommend it, especially as it pertains to the family dynamic?
There is no way. There's the way in front of you. I don't know where my path will lead me, but right now, in terms of spirituality, I'm very anchored into the Hindu faith. There's just something that speaks to me very dearly and lovingly, and so it's a place that I find I can ground myself. I still also just the ideals and teachings of the Buddha are profound in our home. And I honor that. I honor that might shift at some point, or it might not. And so, no, I don't think there's one way. There's right. There's all of these ways. I think, again, if we're going to speak to that higher power, that God, in the way that a lot of people, I think he has littered the ground of this earth with all of the ways. So that each and every one of us as individuals can find our path. And maybe that's not even faith. Maybe it's through something else. Maybe it's through loving people. Maybe it's through service. Maybe, who knows? When it comes to the psychology part, I'll give an example. My wife is, she's an absolute saint of just like patience. And so, she stays at home with my son. And so my son has a lot of space to explore, be himself, fail, break things, right? And there's a part in me that starts if the house is getting too dirty or he's getting too dirty. And it's really funny because this is the nature of the psychological stuff, right? It's so deeply woven into me that if his hands are getting too dirty or he's getting too dirty eating, I want to go clean him. That's like my mom's thing, right? The other day I come home and I was in this kind of just like agitated state. It'd been a long day at work and he spilled something. And I was just like, now he's not even 2 years old. He didn't even hear, that didn't register for him. But because I'm so aware, it registered for me. And it was like, oh, that's from your past, And if he does start to register that, he's going to feel like mistakes are not allowed in the house either.
That's right.
And how might you start to impact him because this sort of, conditioned behavioral response is still in you?
Of course.
Right. So that was a cue for me. Oh, I have still work that I need to do. How do I come home and disconnect so I'm in a more calm and just centered place where little things like that don't bother me? That's the psychology, right? From the spiritual place, I think we're sort of staying really open. There is a room in our house. It's our meditation room, but it's got Buddhas, it's got Christ in there. It's got the Mother Nature. It's got Hanuman, one of the gods of the Hindu faith. There's everything in there, and that room is just full of love. And there's books in there that and I think the way I think about it is eventually my son maybe will gravitate to something in there. Maybe he won't. Whatever his path is his path, for sure. Right? Maybe he never comes across it, and maybe that's okay too.
Absolutely.
But I think that the way we sort of navigate the family system, because I think that's where you're going with that. It's from this deeper place of an acceptance, right? An allowing of the human experience. For example, if there are times when my son falls or hurts himself and he starts to cry, my wife and I will say, yeah, have your emotions. This is frustrating. Let it out. Like, cry it out. Like, this is totally okay. We're very mindful to not impart messages of judgment or messages of a way that he should or shouldn't be, right? Like, really giving him a lot of freedom and space to come into his own and figure out, like, he's another soul who is on a journey. Our job is to just step back and make sure he's safe, that there are some boundaries around the outside for him to navigate, but the rest is for him to learn and become his own sort of being. I'll share this story, Josh. I a couple of months ago came home and life was just, like it does for so many of us, was feeling hard. I was just overwhelmed and probably preoccupied. When I'm not in my meditative state, I'm in my human state. I came home and my wife asked me how I was doing. And I think, again, because she's such a loving and compassionate being, and also because I've really learned to navigate my emotions, I don't hold back anymore, right? I grew up as this very sensitive kid in a world that constantly told me I couldn't feel my feelings. Well, I know better now, right?
Sure.
And when she asked me, how are you doing? I just lost it, right? Like I felt overwhelmed. I felt, and I just started to cry. And in that moment, my son goes into my bag and pulls out my mala beads, which I use for meditation and to just quiet myself. And then I just really sort of in that moment lost it. I was like, oh, like a reminder. Right. Of how to just quiet yourself internally. Right. And my wife did the most beautiful thing. At this point, I was sitting on the floor, just allowing the pain to rush through me. She picked up my son and she sat on my lap, and he was kind of like looking at me, trying to dry my tears. And she's like, look, this is daddy being sad. This is what it looks like. And it's okay.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Which just made me cry even more. Right. But it was beautiful to just have him experience like pain. Like this will, like my human heart breaks, but you will be here one day, right? Like a friend will stab you in the back or your partner's going to leave you. Like you're going to experience this one day, and it's absolutely beautiful. Okay.
So good,
So I hope that gives an essence of like what we're trying to do at home.
It's good. It also, it brings me to my wife and I. Sometimes we have these disagreements. Sometimes it gets a little spicy, as we like to say. And we have those hard conversations. And sometimes in the moment, we'll have words to share. It's never me, cursing her out or anything like that. But we'll have our, petty little arguments. But one of the things that we've been adamant about is actually allowing our children to witness it, also to see that, hey, this is just in this moment. 10 minutes from now, we're still loving each other.
Beautiful.
And it's okay. Because I don't want them to go into marriage thinking, oh, mom and dad had it all together. We never saw it get into anything. And there's something wrong with me. Like, what's going on?
Exactly.
No, you guys saw us go through what we go through, but still forget, still move on. So that's so beautiful, brother. And we can go for hours down so many rabbit holes. There's just like, there's so much that we can cover here. But to bring it in for a landing, what do you see is a possible solution, or will we even ever have a solution as to just all of this division? It's like someone could very well hear you say, "Oh, well, yeah, we also practice Hinduism, or we like the Buddha," and you have certain people of faith that are saying, "Oh, you're on your way to hell," right? and vice versa, right? Maybe, right? We'll see.
We'll see when we get there. I'll let you know.
I doubt that it'll be worse than that ayahuasca experience. I'll tell you that much. But anyway, how, and then you have secular people. You have people who are agnostic, atheists. And I feel like this episode was just this beautiful intertwining of so many different aspects of life and types of personalities and belief systems and all of that, can we ever find peace? Can we find unity? Can we find harmony?
Yeah.
Right? Because there's so much judgment, so much
Yeah.
division. And
Yeah.
that's the sad part about darkness entering faith, is it does create division.
Yeah.
It does point the finger at your belief system and heavily scrutinizes, or even if you're a non-believer.
Yeah.
And what I find is that actually pushes people away from the very thing you want them to be drawn to.
Yeah.
So do you ever see us getting to a point where we could possibly be unified? Or is this the divine plan of God to just let it flow as it may?
All of those things. Yeah. I think that, again, there's a part of me that can sit in this place that sees it's all unfolding perfectly. Right. And so, that person with the harsh criticism and judgment is necessary. Their harshness and judgment of me is a teacher for me. And I can allow myself to be triggered by that. I can allow myself to move into a place of anger or polarization or opposition, or I can choose to move into a place of love and acceptance and honor that that's where they are and that's perfectly okay. And I am where I am, and that's perfectly okay. At least for me, that allows me to continue to let go, to continue to surrender, to continue to just live in a place of inner peace, and that hopefully, the more I reside in that space, the more I might project out in small and maybe big ways. Of curiosity or an encouragement to others to want to live in that space. I think that's ultimately what we're looking for. Right. To live in a place of inner peace, equanimity, kindness, and love. Right. Yeah. And so I do think it's possible. We have seen in our history that every now and then a person comes along and creates a massive ripple to teach us all, a Martin Luther King, a Nelson Mandela, a Mother Teresa, right? I mean, we can go on and on. But it's also that barista at Starbucks that woke up having a shitty day and decided to put a smile on their face and give you your coffee with a cute little note on it. It's also that father that's struggling every day to, fight off addiction so that he can put food on it. It's all of that.
Of course.
And as long as we all just continue to do our small part within ourselves, we send that ripple outward. Right. We don't have to worry about what that ripple is doing. Just worry about doing you in the best way. Wake up every day, and whether it's Buddha or it's Christ or it's whoever. Krishna and Shiva, whoever. Let those entities be a guidance, a light for us that tells us, let's move in that direction. Right. And I think if there's enough of us honoring that, then we build momentum, and we build force, and we build love.
It's beautiful. That's beautiful. I honestly wanted to ask you if there was any message to humanity, but I think that was it right there.
There was a beautiful story. Gandhi was about to get on a train, and a reporter came up and said, Gandhi, give me a message to take back to my people. And he said, my life is my message.
Beautiful. And this is a true testament of your life being your message. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you.
It's been an honor and privilege of just having you here. Such a beautiful conversation. I know we'll have many more.
I'm sure we will.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to running it back. And
hopefully this doesn't vanish.
Yeah, I know. We'll see.
Otherwise, there's a very clear message for you.
Exactly. But all in all, brother, I know you have a lot of incredible things that you're working on as well. And I'm sure there are going to be people who listen to this and they want to see you speak. They want to possibly even bring you on as a speaker, read a book or something. What do you have in the pipeline? I know you referenced a book. If you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So
Yeah, so I wrote a book. It's called The Unseen Journey, and really what it is, it's a testament to where I am in my own life as an entrepreneur and business owner and father and all of those things, but also honoring, a lot of the things that we talked about today. So it's really kind of an invitation to corporate America to do the inner work,
Nice.
right? To go to therapy, go on an ayahuasca retreat, whatever it is,
Mhm.
that through through that work we do on ourselves, right, that we can help liberate others and run amazing companies and make social change
That's
through that,
incredible.
right.
Yeah.
um if folks want to find me, Dr. Carlos A. Garcia on Instagram, and pretty soon I'll have my new website up, drcarlos.com, where people can book me for any sort of speaking opportunities or
Love it.
want to just connect and chat a little bit, or things like that.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, brother. It's
Thank you.
been so beautiful. And guys, it is a wrap. Hope you enjoyed this amazing episode. I most certainly did. And be sure to tune in to our next episode. If you got value from this, like, comment, share, tag, all of that good stuff. Leave a review and be sure to reach out to Dr. Carlos. And especially if you want to bring him out to speak at your next event. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll be seeing you on the next episode. Thanks a lot, brother.
Thanks.
Appreciate you. Yeah, so much love. Absolutely.